Thank you. Hello, can you guys hear me? Is that good? Okay, great. Um, you guys know now a little bit about me. Basically, I'm very privileged and honored to speak to you guys today, and hopefully you guys have some takeaway, right? So that we transform from this lecture, that we're not just listening to someone speak, but that we actually say, oh, I could apply something from what she said. That's the idea, because who cares what I say if it doesn't have any application? So the idea is like this. I was asked to come and speak about a really important subject, which is how can we treat our body naturally, not necessarily with medication, but with herbs and food. And I thought that that was a really great lecture idea. And I was so excited, and I thought, okay, this is my opportunity. Now I get to talk to people about how to use different herbs for different ailments, and I could talk about like different herbs to clean out your blood and different herbs to clean out your lymphatic system, and I could talk about different dietary principles to do X, Y, Z, and I thought that that might be very useless. So practicality won out, and I thought to myself, really, in reality, we could spend so much money on different herbal regimens, and it would mean nothing if we don't have a foundation. So what I really want to talk to you about today is just the general idea of natural health and how it comes to play with different types of ailments that are very popular and affect most people at a certain age. And I wanted to talk about natural remedies for it, but I really wanted to talk about the foundational principle that if you follow the foundation, most likely these issues won't be as much of an issue or an issue at all. Does that make sense? Yes. We're all cool? Great. So this lecture might not be so impressive because I'm not going to say anything that's hopefully new, but what I really want to drive home is what's really, really important for everyone to do. And if you don't do this, you won't have a proper foundation. That is the idea. Okay? All right. There is no magic pill. Good, you're observing. So I just wanted to have a disclaimer before I speak, because I really want to make sure that I don't miscommunicate my intentions, which is I'm not discouraging anyone from taking any prescribed medication. And in no way do I discourage anyone from listening to their doctor or healthcare provider. Okay? And no way am I recommending individuals take natural supplements instead of prescription medication. Does everyone understand that? That's not my message. Okay. We kind of talked about the point of the lecture. Okay. Now, as I do with all my lectures, I think I wrote like a 3-hour lecture that I'm going to try to condense into 45 minutes. Okay. We talked about this idea with Dr. Schiller, who, if you haven't figured out yet, is an amazing doctor, and you guys have been really blessed to listen to him speak. But I just wanted to say that there's this idea of both preventative and immediate medicine. And I think what Dr. Schiller was saying was that the way that the medical system is constructed right now is it's very much into immediate care. And we've lost this idea that there should be this medical intervention that's completely prevention, right? So we stop a disease before we even start it. And that's really the best form of medicine, preventative medicine, stopping a problem before it even starts. All right, so what I would like to do is take that preventative medicine approach in this lecture today, and also say that natural medicine, when it comes to, there are different parts of natural medicine. So let's say nutrition is one of those parts. And so we say that with nutrition, we could work on both the preventative and the immediate. Okay. But what I wanted to talk about first and foremost is the foundation. Because if you don't have the foundation, any little natural thing that you do is really not going to matter. Okay, you could go to a nutritionist, you could go to an herbalist, you could go to an acupuncturist, you could go to a doctor, and it's not going to matter unless 4 of these foundational pillars are addressed. Okay, and that is nutrition, sleep, hydration, and activity. If one of these 4 pillars are deficient, your body is not going to have what it needs to maintain itself. It's just very, very simple. And I see this time and time again with people think that they're doing everything that they should be doing, but then after assessment, we always see that there's at least one pillar that's off. And I always say, address this first, because anything that's alternative that can be added in afterwards will not have an effective result unless this is addressed first. Okay, so the reason why I'm saying this is because all information that you get after the fact is really wonderful, only once this is applied. Make sense? Okay. Now, obviously, what is proper nutrition and what is proper sleep and what is proper hydration and what is proper activity is all a lecture in and of itself and that we don't have time for. But I just wanted to reiterate the idea that this is the first part and this is the foundation. Okay. Now, when it comes to nutrition, that's going to be one of the foundational pillars that we're going to talk about today. And then we're going to talk about different ailments on top of that. So we're not going to talk about the nutrition side as much because we're going to talk more about the different ailments, but I just wanted to reiterate a point, which is that adequate nutrient intake is fundamental to avoid deficiency. And that, let me actually backtrack for a second. When it comes to eating properly, there are so many different philosophies as to how someone should eat. But if we were to narrow it down to a few common ideas that hold true for everything, we could understand how we are supposed to feed ourselves. Does that make sense? Am I saying things properly? Okay. The first thing is that we have to understand that we have to have adequate nutrient intake. If for whatever reason we're missing a vitamin or mineral, our body is not going to be able to sustain itself the way that it's naturally supposed to. And so therefore that invites disease and infection and inflammation, etc., and the list goes on. So the first step of our nutritional foundation is that a person needs to be adequately nourished. That means that they cannot have a nutrient deficiency, and if they do, then that needs to be addressed in addition to whatever treatment they're participating in. Because there's no way that the body could successfully and effectively heal itself if it's missing a key ingredient, okay? So that's one thing. That's one concept when we talk about nutrition as a form of healing. The other one is that we have to avoid the foods that will cause our body to break down. And that's different from every person, right? So people have different intolerances. Some people can't handle nightshade vegetables, some people can. But what I'm really referring to is processed foods. Foods that aren't really man-made, or aren't really earth-made, that are more man-made, and have some type of destructive effect on the body. So obviously the body can't be whole if you're putting something into your mouth that's going to break it apart. And then the last part is really ingredients for repair. So let's say we are making sure that we are ingesting all the vitamins and minerals that we need just to sustain ourselves. And then we're also making sure that we're avoiding the consumption of foods that are going to break us apart. But then if we have this rectification of some type of disease or dysfunction that we're trying to address, there's going to need to be some type of surplus, what I call ingredients of repair, different types of vitamins and minerals or phytochemicals or whatever it is that you can ingest that's going to have some type of healing effect on the body. So just a very quick example. Something like glutamic acid or glutamine, okay? So that's something that you could get from certain vegetables in order to repair your digestive lining. If someone has an ulcer, let's say, whether it's a peptic ulcer or whatever kind of ulcer, then they're going to need to have a surplus of glutamine in order to repair that digestive lining. So not only are they going to need it for just general functioning, whatever their body needs just to maintain its normal levels, they're going to need to have a surplus. So the way that it works as far as nutrition as a pillar of health is that there needs to be an influx of everything that you need in order to sustain life, the avoidance of things that take away life, right? And then also a surplus of whatever it is extra that you specifically need for that balance. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Now, This is a mindset that I think is really important to have, because I think that it's really important to have it at any type of health situation or any type of life situation. And I think that if a person comes to a certain acceptance of this mindset, it makes it much easier to change. And so that mindset is that problems are very complex, but solutions are very simple. Problems happen very passively, whereas solutions happen very actively. Problems happen unintentionally, whereas solutions happen very much intentionally. And I think that this mindset is extremely important. Why is that? Because in order for someone to heal from anything, which is what we're talking about, right? We're talking about health. So health is actually an active process. It's not something that we can just say, oh, this is just going to happen, right? I could be duped into thinking that I'm this immortal being and that I'm going to live until 120 in a 20-year-old body, but that's really not going to happen, right? And so the reality is if we want to have a really good health process, it's something that we're going to have to actively be a part of. And the reality is that I have to, the reality is that the solution for my health is actually quite simple, but the effort is going to be difficult, right? And I think sometimes what happens with people that I see is that people do not like the fact that it's so difficult, so then they keep searching for different solutions, and then there's just more and more solutions out there, and then the solution seems so complicated because there's so many things to choose from. But the reality is that the solution is quite basic, right? It's really the foundation. If you have the foundation, that's really the solution. But the amount of effort that requires that really basic solution is high. And if we are able to accept that, then the healing process is so much easier. Okay? All right. Okay, so now let's just talk about the issues. So now we have like a nice mental background as to what we were talking about, okay? Now let's actually talk about the meat of the conversation. So we have different common problems. We're going to talk about cholesterol, we're going to talk about dementia, we're going to talk about diabetes, arthritis, all these things that people commonly deal with. And we're going to talk about how to resolve these issues, all right? Okay, with the mindset that we've talked about, with the mindset that first we really need to have a foundation. If we don't have a foundation, then resolving these problems are really going to be moot, okay? And that in order to heal, we're going to have to accept that the problem can be complicated, but the solution's quite simple, and that the solution takes a lot of effort to implement, okay? Okay, so now, the first common problem is cholesterol. Okay, so normally people over the age of 50 end up somehow having a problem with cholesterol. So I wanted to talk about cholesterol. We're going to talk about cholesterol very much in depth. The other one's not as much because we're just not going to have time. And hopefully we could highlight some issues on this subject. Now, not everyone deals with cholesterol, but at least everyone knows someone who does deal with it. And I feel like there's so much misinformation, so much outdated information that somehow is still circulated. Okay, so first and foremost, we have to understand what cholesterol is. Cholesterol is a naturally occurring substance. It has a supreme function in your body. It is the basic backbone of different types of neurotransmitters and hormones, and it's very difficult for the body to function without cholesterol, okay? So we understand that cholesterol has some type of importance, but just like anything in the body, when it's out of balance, it's bad, right? Anything that's good is really just something that you need that's in balance. Anything that's bad, normally something that you need that's out of balance, okay? So what happens when cholesterol is specifically out of balance, it can lead to different types of can lead to different type of plaque buildup and cardiovascular risk, etc. Okay, so now, here's the deal. What we normally say is that cholesterol is an issue when there's an elevated of something that people don't know. It's called LDL, but people don't know what LDL is. And then there's a decrease of something called HDL, but people don't really know what HDL is. Right, so people think it's good cholesterol, and then people think it's bad cholesterol, and then people are constantly thinking, wait, is HDL the good one or the bad one? What is it? And what if I was to tell you that it's not even cholesterol? LDL and HDL, not even cholesterol. They're proteins. They're proteins that carry cholesterol throughout the body. And both of them have a function. LDL carries your cholesterol to one part of the body, and HDL carries your cholesterol to another part of the body. And they have a different way of breaking down, and they're totally different, but it's not cholesterol. But we call them cholesterol because we don't really know what it is. I mean, the general public isn't educated to know what it is. Okay, and then another thing is cholesterol shouldn't really be an issue for us because it's something that we make and that we need. But because the standard Western diet has become so high in refined fats and so high in refined carbohydrates and so much higher in animal products, so because our diet is different, that now affects our physiology, and so now our cholesterol is a little elevated. Okay? There could be other causes of high cholesterol, but normally it's diet. There is a small group that it is definitely genetic, but they have very specific characteristic traits, both physiological and internal. And so I would say that most of the time it's not genetic, but there is a small group that it is. Okay. So now I'm going to just try to go through everything quickly because if not, then we won't finish it all. So in cholesterol, what I'm going to do is going to be a little controversial because what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the different cholesterol numbers and say this is what the Western approach is to look at it. But I personally feel that it's very outdated, and we're going to look at it through my eyes and hopefully have just a different approach. And then we're going to talk about solutions. Okay, but in total cholesterol, what we use to calculate our cholesterol is both the values of the HDL lipoproteins and the LDL lipoproteins and something called triglycerides, which is actually not cholesterol, it's just the fat in your blood, okay? But altogether, that's what we use to make the equation called cholesterol. Okay, generally speaking, when it comes to HDL and LDL, right, HDL we said is the good kind, LDL we said is the not so good kind, even though you definitely need it. So we want generally the ratio to be 2 to 1. So meaning the LDL should be double the HDL. Okay. And if it's lower than that, okay, if it's or if the LDL is significantly higher, then it's going to be more than double. And once it gets more than double, it's considered not so good. Okay. So now what I want to do is go through this with you and tell you what my opinion is. Okay. So here's the deal. The total cholesterol, these are the normal reference ranges, okay? But I'm going to tell you that this value doesn't mean anything at all. So forget about this number, and when you see that it's borderline or that it's high, don't even think about it. It's a worthless number. Okay. The next thing is LDL cholesterol. So LDL cholesterol is not cholesterol. We have to recognize it's a lipoprotein, and we have to recognize that it has a function. Okay. And what labs will normally say is that your LDL should ideally be below 100. And if it's between 100 and 130, then maybe you're okay. And that if you're between 130 to 160, then you're high, or borderline high. And what I'm going to tell you is that is all wrong. It's a very outdated approach that came about when statin drugs became very, very popular. Now, I'm not saying anything against statin medication because I'm not saying that people should be on it or not on it. What I'm saying is is that the reference range for cholesterol is very skewed, okay? And the problem with this is that most people having an LDL cholesterol of 100 or below can be very dangerous. And I'll explain why. So for me, from my training, right, we learned that your cholesterol should really be your age plus 100, which is significantly high in comparison to what people say that it should be. Now, I want to make some clarifications, okay? First and foremost, there are different kinds of LDL. LDL is a protein that has a lifespan, and it's supposed to break down. Now, the particle sizes that the LDL breaks down into matters so much more than the number. And the reason why is because the particle size of the LDL is what contributes to plaque buildup and not the total number. So the total number with LDL doesn't really say anything. Until you do something called a particle test, your LDL is just a number. And as long as your LDL is your age plus 100, it totally makes sense, right? So if someone is 20, it totally makes sense that their LDL should be 120. If someone's 50, totally makes sense that their LDL should be 150. And the numbers should not be compared. Does that make sense? Okay? Now this is very controversial because you could say, well, I have a history of heart disease. I have a risk of high cholesterol in my family. And I'm not saying that you should think that just because your LDL is 160 and you're 60 that you should disregard everything. But what I'm saying is that it's not so simple by saying, oh, your LDL is above 100, so therefore you need a statin medication, right? If someone has a history of some type of heart disease or high cholesterol, then they must do a particle test because otherwise they're not really going to know if they're at risk for anything or not, okay? So what I'm really saying is that the total number should actually be much higher than it's perceived to be, and that it's most likely not as much of an issue as people would perceive it to be, and that the particle test is so much more important. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because I see a lot of negative consequences from people taking statin medications for too long or even when they weren't supposed to. So let's say someone has an LDL that's like 160 and they're 60 and their doctor says that's not good, I want you to lower it. Well, I'll tell you very common problems, and we're going to go through the negative side effects of statin medications. Again, not saying that people shouldn't be on it, but when people take it and they're not supposed to be on it, let's say I'll give you a very common example that I see in men. Men start taking statin medications, it drives their cholesterol down. Well, cholesterol is a necessary backbone of hormones, so now their testosterone is all of a sudden goes down. Now that their testosterone is going down, they're not able to metabolize their energy properly. They start gaining midsection weight. They start going on a diet, but their cholesterol is dramatically decreased. They're not making enough testosterone. So even if they go on this diet, they're getting all the vitamins and minerals they need, but they're not losing their weight because their cholesterol is so low. This was barbaric. I had a client once that came in and his LDL cholesterol was 30. And he was a whale, like humongous. And every year he would just gain more and more and more weight. And I said, you really shouldn't be on your statin medication anymore because your testosterone is so low and this is the cause of it and you're not going to be able to lose weight. And men are really great because they're really committed to what their doctors tell them. So he said, my doctor does not want me to go off of it. I'm staying on the statin medication. And he just would not lose weight. So this is something that happens, and it's very, very common. So I'm not trying to say that people shouldn't be on statin medications. That's the last thing that I want to say. I'm just saying that sometimes it's extremely inappropriate, and you should know that that's a possibility. Okay? All right. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about is HDL, which is considered the good. The reason why HDL is considered better than LDL is that it breaks down faster, so it's not going to stay in the body as long, and it also directs the cholesterol to more preferable places in the body. Typically, HDL cholesterol is something that you want to be extremely high. The higher, the better. The greater the longevity, right? And also, one of the reasons why we don't think about the total cholesterol as mattering so much is because if the HDL is really high, then the total number is also going to look high. And because the total cholesterol is just an equation that doesn't mean anything, we really have to look at the separate numbers. So the HDL cholesterol ideally should be 60 or above. The reality is most people have a difficult time getting it between 30 to 40. And so the lower the HDL cholesterol is, it's not so great for longevity. Now, there are a few things. HDL cholesterol, largely genetic, that's one. Two, very much dependent on different nutrition. Different nutrients are known to increase HDL. And then the third is if you're taking a statin medication, it's going to drive your good cholesterol down. So if your good cholesterol is already very low, just know that by taking a statin medication, it's going to drive it down, and that's going to be worse for you because this is something that you want to be higher. Okay. And then the last one is triglycerides. And triglycerides, I also have a different approach as to how I read them because I'm a nutritionist. I work in prevention. I don't work in immediate. I can, but people who are smart go to a nutritionist before a problem arises, okay? And so the way that I look at blood work is I say, okay, I look at triglycerides and I see what value they're in. And the way that it's written is that if you're at 150, then you're fine. And I think that that's not correct. Ideally, you want your triglycerides to be 80 or below. Basically, your triglycerides are the fat in your blood. So the more or the higher your triglycerides are, the more viscous your blood is going to be. The more viscous your blood is, the more risk you have for different types of cardiovascular issues. Also, normally what happens when your triglycerides are high, it normally means that you're not metabolizing your sugar properly. So not that you're eating too much sugar or eating too many carbohydrates, but that your body is not breaking it down properly, because what happens is sugar will go into the blood, and then it's not being broken down, it's not being absorbed by the cells, and so the body will eventually convert it into fat in your veins and arteries. Okay, so now, before we talk about statin medications specifically, I want to say two things that's really important. If you're taking a statin medication, extremely imperative that you take along with that something called vitamin K2 and CoQ10, or something else called ubiquinol. Ubiquinol is a more absorbable form of CoQ10, even better than CoQ10. But if you're going to be taking a statin medication and that's just part of your health regimen, right, and I'm not telling you to go against it, really, really important that you add these two things because statin medications will stop this from developing in the body. And they're necessary, and we're going to talk more about them. Okay. So let's talk about the influence of statin medications on CoQ10. And I want to talk about the reason why we're even talking about this. The reason why we're talking about this is because first we want to understand that we don't want to get here if we don't have to, right? We don't want to get to a position that we want to take statin medications because if we could prevent it before an issue arises, if it's possible, then that's preferred. That's one. And two is we have to understand when we're taking something the effect that it has on our body so that we could balance that out. And three, so that we could decide if that's an appropriate long-term solution for us. Normally, when I come across someone who's taking a statin medication, I say, you should really think of it as depending on the situation, of course, whether it's genetic or not, but I always say that you should look at it as a short-term solution and not a long-term solution. Like this whole idea that people are taking statin medications from, the time they get prescribed to the day of their death, I think is just completely BS. I think that it's very, very bad for the body given certain circumstances. And I am okay with saying such sharp statements. Okay, so first what I want to do is talk about how statins deplete your body of CoQ10, which they've been shown to do. So first and foremost, what is CoQ10? So it is, let's say, an ingredient in your body that's used for energy production by every cell in the body. It's vital for your vitality and for your energy, and boy, does your body feel it when it doesn't have it, okay? The CoQ10's reduced version, or a version of CoQ10, is something called ubiquinol. And ubiquinol is necessary for what we call cellular respiration, which is a part of our metabolic process. That is what's necessary for the production of ATP, which is our body's basic unit of energy. Because of its role in energy production, think of it as like an energy feeder for all of our different organ systems. It gives energy to your different organs for functioning, specifically the heart. So one of the correlations that we found is that there can be an increased risk of heart disease with people who are taking statin medication, which seems completely contradictory because you're taking a statin medication in order to avoid heart incidences. But because of the fact that it drains the body of CoQ10, if CoQ10 or ubiquinol is not taken in accordance to a statin medication, it could cause a lot of damage to the heart. Okay. So my general recommendation is if you're taking a statin medication, really important to take ubiquinol. If you're not taking a statin medication and you're over the age of 40, maybe a good idea to take something called CoQ10. The reason why I'm saying the difference between someone taking a statin and not is because it's more important for someone taking a statin to take the more absorbable, higher effective dose, which is going to be ubiquinol. I have to say that it's quite pricey, but your body will not function effectively without it if you're taking a statin. Now, here is a question I think that you're probably thinking. Okay, so I'm taking this statin medication, and I have doctor supervision. I get my blood test taken regularly, and why is it that my doctor never told me to take ubiquinol? So this is a very common question that I get, and the common answer that I give back is that they're just not trained in something like this. Like, I think that what Dr. Schiller was saying, which is really key, is that it takes a while for new information to get circulated into the mainstream medicine. And so there is a lot of research that shows that statin medications deplete your body of CoQ10, specifically ubiquinol, and it's nothing against your doctor if he didn't tell you, it's just not his training. But it's my training, and that's why I'm telling you. Okay? Cool. All right. Next, vitamin K2. Have you guys heard of vitamin K2? No? Okay. So I'm going to briefly explain it. There's something called vitamin K. It's a vitamin. But there's also something called vitamin K2 and vitamin K1, and they're totally different. Vitamin K1 is what we get from leafy green vegetables, and it's really great for wound healing, something that we have to be totally careful of if we're taking a blood thinner, etc. Okay. Vitamin K2 is something that you're supposed to produce in your intestines. It's something that occurs and is created from bacterial fermentation in your guts. And because, we take so much more antibiotics than we've, taken before, we produce a lot less of it because our bacteria and our digestive system is not what it used to be. So vitamin K2 is actually something that you use for something extremely fundamental. Not only do you use it for vitamin D absorption and calcium absorption, but you also use it in order to redirect where calcium goes. Okay? Has anyone here in this room heard that calcium supplementation could be dangerous? Great. The reason why calcium supplementation is dangerous is because if you take a calcium supplement, let's say after the age of 25, you're most likely not going to absorb the calcium into your bones anymore. So what's going to happen is it's going to go into your arteries and veins, and the more calcium you have, the more opportunity you have for plaque buildup, because plaque buildup is calcium. So, okay, great, thank you. So then what happens is K2 comes in and it says, oh no, calcium, you don't want to go into the veins and arteries, I'm going to redirect you to the bones. And so what vitamin K2 is necessary for is redirecting calcium in the body, and also improves vitamin D absorption. So sometimes people who take a vitamin D supplement for a long time, but they don't see their numbers change, it's because really they should be taking vitamin K2 with their vitamin D in order to absorb it. D like dog. Oh, can I answer your question afterwards? Because I won't get to finish. Okay, thank you. And so, let's see. So there have been several studies that show that people who take stents have a reduced absorption of vitamin K2, both that the functionality of it and the mechanism in which you produce it is inhibited. And so therefore, if vitamin K2 is depleted, that's going to have a huge impact on not only osteoporosis, but heart disease, heart attack and stroke, different brain diseases because of the calcification of calcium and blood pressure, etc., and different cancers. How much more time do we have? Okay, so we'll try to go faster. Basically, another thing that statins are known to decrease is something called ketones, which you could think of them as like signaling molecules in the body that are really important for how we cue our body and its longevity and aging. Because of the effect of different things on the body from statins, there's also been some studies that have connected statins to different types of cancers, also risk of diabetes, neurodegenerative disorders, and degenerative eye conditions. And the list goes on, and I could talk about this forever, but we don't have time for that. So basically, here's the issue. There's something called cholesterol. We need it, and it could get off balance when our foundation is off balance. So obviously, we want to fix our foundation first. And then, when we are looking at the cholesterol, we have to decide, how am I going to go about it? Am I going to take a statin medication, which obviously, like all other medications, has its consequences? And if I am going to take a statin medication, then I need to know that I need to take ubiquinol and vitamin K2 with it. And then the next thing is, if I'm not going to do that, then what am I going to do? Okay, so the natural way of approaching cholesterol. First things first, I'm going to say that this should all be very basic. Remember how I said solutions are quite simple? I believe that this solution is really quite simple. But like all solutions require effort, and so you have to be very, very consistent with your solution, otherwise it's going to have no impact. So if you do what I say for like one time, expect it not to work. Okay, so omega-3 fatty acids. So omega-3 fatty acids can be found in fish, like fish oil, and seeds like flaxseed or chia seed or hemp seeds, etc. And they are known to increase HDL cholesterol, and reduce heart disease. This is really fundamental for almost any health issue. The reason why this is so fundamental is because we don't get enough of this in our diet. Okay? So we're gonna talk about it later on, but I don't think we're gonna get to it, so I'm gonna say this now. Have you guys ever heard of omega-3 fatty acid? Fantastic. Omega-6 fatty acid? Omega-9 fatty acid? Phenomenal. You guys are educated. So this is how it works for those who do not know. There's omega-3 fatty acids, and then there's something called omega-6. And really what it means is that there are two different types of fats that are really good for you and that you need, but because they're different, have different properties in the body. Just like a carrot is going to affect you a different way than a cucumber would, right? Okay. So now when it comes to these fats, because they have different functions, okay, thank you. Because they have different functions, we need them in balance. So what happens is most fats out there are going to be in the omega-6 variety, and less fats are in omega-3. So what happens is this. Omega-3s are blood thinners. They're natural blood thinners. They thin out the blood, they decrease inflammation in the body, and omega-6 is exactly the opposite. They thicken the blood, and they can increase inflammation in the body when in excess. What happens is most people do not have enough omega-3 fatty acids in their diet. So there's just a small amount of omega-3 and a huge accumulation of omega-6. And so that increases risk of inflammation, it increases blood thickening, and it also skews what the cholesterol should be. So what you'll see for most health conditions is that they will improve when you consume omega-3 fatty acids. Now, if the foundation was solid and people were eating enough in their diet, then it wouldn't necessarily matter. Okay, that's a good ringtone. But because most people don't consume enough, you're going to see it listed in almost every place for both neurodegenerative diseases, liver diseases, etc. Okay, so let's continue on and get to the point. So if I was going to improve my cholesterol, I would take omega-3 fatty acids, I would take soluble fiber because fiber helps decrease the amount of cholesterol I reabsorb. I would consume more olive oil. Omega-3 also has omega-6 because that's known to raise HDL. I would eat garlic and onions raw because that's unless it causes digestive issues, because that's known to help decrease LDL. And there are so many different herbs that help control LDL. Okay? Now, we talked about what we want to consume. We also want to talk about what we want to avoid. So sugar and refined carbohydrates, the worst. Okay? Alcohol, just the worst for cholesterol. Obviously not for a good time. Hydrogenated fats, okay? Caffeine, trans fats, dairy, animal meat. You either want to avoid it completely or limit. If it was me, and this was an issue and I was taking medication, I would just avoid all of these. And that would be my approach. As far as supplemental ideas, one is fish oil. Like if you're not going to incorporate it into your diet, more omega-3s, then you should definitely take it in a capsule form, as long as it's a good quality. CoQ10 or ubiquinol, like we said. Niacin, which is B3, but you have to be careful with niacin because it could give you like a hot flush if you take too much. And that's supposed to increase HDL and decrease LDL. There's something called red yeast rice extract. Red yeast rice extract is like a natural statin. It's known to decrease cholesterol by 35%. But just like a statin, you need to take CoQ10 with it. And like we talked about garlic, but raw garlic is obviously the best. Now, here's the deal. Oh, and then obviously exercise. But I had this whole conversation on arthritis and on osteoporosis that we are not going to have time to talk about. So what I want to do is this. I'm going to have a piece of paper, and you guys can write your emails, and then I could send you the rest of the lecture. But obviously take it with a grain of salt because you're not hearing my explanation. And so what I want to do is get to the last, let's talk about this. I want to talk about something like this first, because actually, can I see that, please? I want to talk about what you have. Can I borrow this for a second? Yeah? Okay, I'm just going to give this back to you. You guys have a handout. And I wanted to talk about this because it's basically going to summarize what you could do at home to help yourself out. Now, Every supplement out there is like a medication. So you should not take it unknowingly. You need advice, and you can contact myself or Dr. Schiller or another nutritionist or another doctor, whoever you feel comfortable with, who knows what they're talking about. And this is something that you could take in addition to that foundation that we spoke about. So omega-3 fatty acids for its improvement on your blood, for its improvement on decreasing inflammation, for giving you the building blocks that you need in order to build your brain, to build other molecules in your body, to stabilize your cholesterol. Very, very important that you take a vitamin D in addition to vitamin K. Most people do not take an adequate amount of vitamin D when they take it. They need a minimum of 1,000 to 2,000 IU, okay? And you should take vitamin K with that. There's this really good supplement called Bone Renewal by a company called Pure Synergy. The reason why I like it is because it's a very healthy calcium supplement. It's a calcium supplement that is natural, food-based, so you absorb it much better, and it has all the other essential nutrients that you need in order to not increase cardiovascular risk and also prevent or reduce the incidence of osteoporosis.
What was the name of the company again?
Pure Synergy. And you could get this off of iherb.com. It also has vitamin D and K2 in it and all the other minerals that you need for bones that we weren't able to talk about. A food-based multivitamin, because if you're not going to change the way that you eat, you definitely shouldn't be malnourished. Now, you shouldn't take a multivitamin that's synthetic. A multivitamin should be 100% food-based, or else it's going to increase your risk for disease. Do you understand? Do not take a synthetic multivitamin, because that's only going to increase your risk for disease. You want to take a food-based. So for whatever reason, my brain's not working, so I could only think of one, which is called like Juice Plus, because it's food that's literally dehydrated down. But there are other ones as well, and we could talk about it privately to see what's best for you. If you're not going to take a multivitamin, then really good to take a B complex. If you take a B complex, listen to this word, you have to get something that's called methylated, which means that in the B complex, it's going to have methylated folate and methylcobalamin or methyl B12. Otherwise, it could have negative ramifications, and it's not really going to do so much good. If you're over, I will in a second, I'll answer in a second. If you're over the age of 45, you should be taking a B12. And the B12, again, should be called methylcobalamin. If it doesn't say methylcobalamin, if it just says cobalamin, it's not worth your money, because there are types of B12 that really absorb and integrate, and there are kind that you're just going to urinate straight out. So that's not worth your money. So you need to take a B12 called methylcobalamin. And the reason why you need to take it is because as the human body gets older, they secrete less of something called intrinsic factor, which is responsible for the absorption of B12. So then it's very likely and common for people to develop B12 deficiencies even though they're eating foods with B12. And what I've seen is when people take vitamin D and K2 and a good quality B complex and B12, then they do so much better in almost everything. Okay? Obviously, we can't be so general, but I don't have time to be specific. And even if you take a B complex, you should still take a B12 separately, because a lot of times, even if someone's not older, their B12 is not going to absorb in the B complex. So when I say to take a B12 separately, it's something that's sublingual and goes underneath the tongue. The next ones are turmeric. Turmeric you have to be careful for, because if you're taking a blood thinner, then you shouldn't take it, because it does thin out your blood. But it's really good for decreasing inflammation. However, if you take turmeric on its own, it's not going to be effective. It needs to have some component either called black pepper in it or something called bioperine, and that is what allows for the turmeric to even absorb and have an effect on your body. And then the last one is something called phospholipids. Okay? What do I mean by that? We had a slide. It's something called phosphatidylcholine or phosphatidylserine. Oh, here we go. You see it's on the bottom, number 8 and 9. This is very neuroprotective. It's something that I would highly recommend for most people to take, definitely pregnant women to take, but definitely people who, are conscientious of how their nerve functioning is or how their brain is functioning, because these are two pseudo vitamins, like choline, for example, is something that you're generally supposed to make yourself. You're also supposed to get it from food. And what happens is if people don't make it properly, then they're not going to have it. And so the idea is that if you get it, if you ingest it, it's going to improve your brain functioning. Okay. So I wrote too big a lecture, and I did not have enough chance to talk to you guys about everything that I wanted to. But I just want to say 2 key points, and then after that, I'm going to open the floor for questions. Point number 1, foundation. If you don't have a foundation of proper nutrition, proper sleep, proper hydration, and proper activity, then it's going to be very hard for you to recover from anything. You could take a medication, you could take an herb, but it's not going to be as effective. So put your intention into that. And then the next thing that I'm going to say is healing is an active, conscious process. It's difficult, the solutions are quite simple, and it's a commitment. So once you commit yourself to it, just do it. That's the idea. Okay.
Thank you very much. Belle, what are the arrangements for lunch?